All right, well, welcome to another edition of Traveling Through History. Tonight, we're going to be celebrating many of the great women from history. We don't do enough looking at all the incredible women that have shaped our history globally and in the United States and all over Europe. And so tonight, we're going to be looking at 20 such women that are, in some cases, famous, and in other cases, you'll have no idea anything about them. And you'll learn a lot about a woman from history that was consequential that you might not know much about. So tonight we're going to highlight these 20. This is going to be our part one of this series. We will do future series where we look at 20 additional women from history that you may or may not know about. But let's go ahead and get into the 20 important women from history, part one. So as I said, this is the important women from history, part one. You can see this is celebrating Women's History Month. And you can see a lot of the great women we're going to talk about right there tonight. Let's first look at Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was a powerful medieval queen. You can see some great pictures of her down on the bottom there. So she was essentially the medieval queen who took on Europe's most powerful men. She was born in 1122 in Aquitaine, France, and she died in Anjou, France in 1204. So she was 82 years old, very old for that time of the history. Very old for that time of history. Eleanor of Aquitaine served as queen of both France and England in the 12th century, making her one of the most powerful women of the time and most influential. From 1147 to 1149, she accompanied Louis from France, who was the king at the time, on the Second Crusade to protect the fragile Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, founded after the First Crusade only 50 years before from the Turkish assault. Eleanor's conduct during this expedition, especially at court of her uncle Raymond of Poitiers in Antioch, aroused Louis's jealousy and marked the beginning of their estrangement in their marriage. After the return to France, and after a short-lived reconciliation between the two, their marriage was annulled in March of 1152. So you can see Louis had tremendous jealousy about how popular and how effective Eleanor of Aquitaine was. So really, it's more of a testament to her abilities and how incredible a woman, how powerful she had gotten. Though Eleanor wished to stay unmarried, this was impossible at the time because of her wealth and power, and it made her a target for kidnapping. If she was forcibly married to somebody, the kidnapper would then take all of her lands and all of her prestige. So you can see the staying unmarried part was not possible at the time. One kidnapping was actually attempted in 1152 by Geoffrey of Anjou, but Eleanor did escape that particular kidnapping. She reportedly sent an envoy to Geoffrey's older brother Henry, Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy, demanding that he marry her instead. Whatever is true or not on this fable, Henry and Eleanor were married on May in 1152, just 8 weeks after her marriage to Louis VII was annulled. In 1154, Henry became King Henry II of England. Eleanor bore him 8 children and played a very active role in his government for almost 2 decades. Became very, very prominent as a queen to Henry II. However, her relationship with Henry was strained over the years, partly because he neglected their 8 children. Eleanor returned to Aquitaine much later in life, in about 1168, with 2 of her sons, Richard and Geoffrey. So you can see what an incredible woman she was. She had a huge impact on 2 different countries and 2 different kingdoms, being both the Queen of France and the Queen of England. So pretty amazing, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Definitely look her up and learn some more about this influential medieval queen. Our next woman from history we're looking at tonight is Marie Curie. She was a scientist and first female Nobel Peace Prize winner. She lived from 1867 to 1934. She boasted an extraordinary array of achievements, said Patricia Farah, the president of the British Society for History of Science. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize, first female professor at the University of Paris, and the first person, note the use there, not woman, person, to win a second Nobel Peace Prize. So pretty incredible. Not only was she the first female to win the prize, but she was the first person to win 2 of them. She was born in Warsaw. Curie studied physics at University of Paris, where she met her future research collaborator and husband, Pierre. Together, they identified 2 new elements, radium and polonium, named after her native Poland. After he died, She raised a small fortune in the US and Europe to fund laboratories and to develop cancer treatments. Marie Curie was a woman of action as well as enormous intellect. During the First World War, she helped to equip ambulances with X-ray equipment. This is the first time this had ever been tried, and often drove them to the front line herself. She was completely fearless. Despite becoming ill from the radioactive materials she constantly handled, Curie never lost her determination to excel in her scientific career that she loved. Her memory is preserved by the Cancer Society that bears her name and continues to help terminally ill patients from all over the world. So you can see Marie Curie, what an incredible woman, incredible physicist, chemist, and overall impact on the world was still being felt even today. Pretty incredible the impact that she was able to have as a two-time Nobel Peace winner. Our third woman is Amelia Earhart. She was an aviator of the skies. Amelia took up aviation in 1921 at age 24 and went on to break the women's altitude record the following year when she rose to 14,000 feet. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and over the next 5 years continued to break speed records and flying records. In June 1937, she began a flight around the world, becoming the first person to fly from Red Sea to India. Notice person, not woman, first person to do that. She was reported missing on July 2nd near Holland Island in the Pacific. Earhart's disappearance was one of history's unsolved mysteries, and she was declared dead in absentia in 1939. After the war and after a short stint at Columbia University in a pre-med program, Amelia had dropped out of school and moved to California where her parents had lived. She took her first plane ride in 1920, and you can imagine that was when she was 23, and she became hooked. She later recalled the experience. As soon as we left the ground, I knew I had to fly. She began flying lessons with female aviator Anita Snook, working odd jobs to pay for her lessons. She received a pilot's license in December 1921 from the National Aeronautics Association. She set a woman's altitude record of 14,000 feet on October 1922, and on May 16, 1923, she received an international pilot's license from the Federation of Aeronautique Internationale, becoming the 16th woman to earn that honor. And you can see some incredible pictures of her here in her various planes and what an incredible impact she had on American culture and really on international culture as a woman who was becoming a trailblazer in aviation. And she really had everybody, men and women, thinking about what a cool career this could be and how we could test the limits. Our next woman of history is Ada Lovelace. She was a scientist and was the first computer programmer in world history. She was born in London, England. Born in the 19th century, Ada Lovelace had a fascination with science and mathematics that defied the expectations of her class and gender at the time. After being introduced at the age of 17 to inventor Charles Babbage, her work ensured she would become one of the most important figures in early history of the computer. She is one of the many figures in history of science whose work was only properly appreciated posthumously. A gifted mathematician, Ada Lovelace is considered to be the first computer programmer, an industry that has since transformed business, our lives, and the entire world. In an industry still dominated by men, it's particularly striking that the first programmer was a woman. And you can see a great book there on the bottom, Ada's Algorithm, that talks all about her life and her calculations and how she became a master mathematician, and how she turned that into the love of the computer and was a trailblazer in that area as well. What an incredible story Ada Lovelace had. Our next woman in history is Florence Nightingale. She was a military nursing pioneer. She was born on May 12, 1820 in Florence, Italy. In her honor, this day will become, starting in 1965, the International Nurses Day in her honor. Her name was given by her parents in recognition of the city where they lived at the moment when she was born, which was Florence, Italy. Florence Nightingale led the first official team of British military nurses to Turkey during the Crimean War, fought between Britain and Russia in 1853 to 1856. More soldiers died from disease than wounds in the conflict, and Nightingale, as well as tending the sick, reported back to Army medical services on how to reduce avoidable deaths. Nicknamed the Lady of the Lamp for the night round she made tending to the wounded and sick, Nightingale continued in her work after the war and was instrumental in establishing a permanent military nursing service and implementing improvements to Army medical services. So, what an incredible woman she was, and the amount of impact she had both on the nursing industry and on medical nursing in general was still incredible at that time and being felt still today. Everyone talks about Florence Nightingale as kind of the example of the ultimate nurse and nurse manager, and the beacon of helping people get through wounds and other potential life-saving treatments. Our next woman from history is Boudica. She was a queen of the Sinai tribe during the Roman occupation of Britain in either 60 or 61 AD. Boudica united different tribes in a Celtic revolt against Roman rule, leading an army of around 100,000. She succeeded in driving the Romans out of modern-day Colchester, then capital of the Roman Britain, London, and Verulamium, which is St. Albans. Her success led Roman Emperor Nero to consider withdrawing from Britain entirely, until the Roman governor Polonius finally defeated her in a battle in the West Midlands. Shortly afterwards, Boudica died, probably either from suicide or through illness. Boudica's husband, Prasutagus, was king of the Iceni. When Prasutagus died in 60 with no male heir, he left the private wealth to his two daughters and to Emperor Nero, trusting thereby to win imperial protection for his family from Rome. Instead, the Romans annexed his kingdom, humiliating his family, and plundered the chief tribesmen. While the provincial governor, Suetonius, Polonius was absent in 60 or 61, Boudica raised a rebellion throughout East Anglia. The insurgents burned Colchester, Verulamium, the mast of Londonium or London, and several other military posts. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Boudica's rebels massacred 70,000 Romans and pro-Roman Britons and cut to pieces the Roman Ninth Legion. Polonius met the Britons at the point thought to be near present-day Fenny Stratford on Watling, and that's where the decisive battle happened. And of course, Boudica died shortly thereafter. But what an incredible example of a woman who was this brave. She was married to the king who died, and then she took over as the leader of this tribe to push back against the Romans, and becomes really a symbol of pride in the British people who were pushing back at that time against this power. Pretty incredible story of this Celtic queen. Our next woman from history is Rosalind Franklin. She was a chemist and discoverer of DNA. She was a physical chemist, a researcher, and foremost expert in crystallography. Dr. Franklin's renown grew out of 2 years she spent conducting research at King's College London in the early 1950s, as scientists across the globe raced to discover the structure of DNA. She was working in a laboratory environment less than collegial to female scientists. As you can imagine, it was mostly men. She was often in isolation. Dr. Franklin patiently struggled to prove the structure through mathematical computations and to capture the B form of DNA through more than 100 hours of photographic exposure. While her photo 51, the most famous photo she took, and related data were integral to the 1953 discovery and description of the double helix structure of DNA, her contribution went largely unrecognized for almost 50 years. So this is one of those women from history that's very little known and really should be much more renowned and much more famous for what she did, which is to crack the code of DNA. She was a role model for our university, aspiring scientists, health professionals, and those unrepresented in the whole STEM research area. When the double helix structure of DNA was discovered, scientists claimed that they had unraveled the secret of life itself. The crucial piece of evidence was provided by expert crystallographer Rosalind Franklin, the famous photograph 51, which was an X-ray picture showing a dark cross of dots, the signature image of a concealed molecular spiral. The life-changing innovations that followed her discoveries, mapping the human genome, test tube babies, genetic engineering, all depended on understanding the chemical foundations of heredity, which Rosalind Franklin was able to crack. So pretty incredible the contribution Rosalind Franklin gave to society by cracking DNA and by finding this double helix structure, which has now led to the research and medical advancements we've had up to today. So she really should get a lot more notoriety than she does. Our next woman from history is Mother Teresa. Almost everyone has heard of her, but not many people really know the details behind her. She was a charitable and spiritual leader and world famous. She lived for 87 years from 1910 to 1997. Mother Teresa was born in Albania and was a Roman Catholic nun who lived in India for most of her life. In 1950, she founded the Missionaries of Charity, which attracted many sisters who took vows of chastity, poverty, obedience, and free service to the poorest of the poor. The work that the order undertook in over 130 countries included managing homes for people who were dying, soup kitchens, orphanages, and schools. Although criticized for her opposition to abortion, her charitable work changed the lives of many of the most vulnerable people all over the world. On October 7th in 1950, Mother Teresa received permission from the Holy See to start her own order, which was the Missionaries of Charity, whose primary task was to love and care for those persons nobody was prepared to look after in the world. In 1965, 15 years later, the society became an international religious family by decree of Pope Paul VI. Mother Teresa's work has been recognized and acclaimed throughout the world, and she has received a number of awards and distinctions, including Pope John's Peace Prize in 1971, the Nehru Prize for her promotion of international peace and understanding in 1972, the Balzan Prize in 1979, and then she also got the Templeton and Magsaysay Awards. So you can see she got 6 major international awards during her time and really had a humongous impact on putting into the spotlight for the world poverty, sickness, homelessness, and really the underprivileged. That was her driving force, and she felt that it was her religious call to tend to those people. What an incredible woman she was. Our next woman from history, most have also heard of, that's Cleopatra. She was the female pharaoh of Egypt. She actually lived from 69 BC to 30 BC. She was the final ruler of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra was more famous for her beauty, and her subsequent simplistic portrayals often depict a formidable, politically shrewd monarch. She was directly involved in the running of a kingdom that faced all kinds of challenges on many fronts. Born in Alexandria, Cleopatra was the daughter of Ptolemy XII, who named her his heir before his death in 51 BC. Cleopatra began her reign alongside her brother, Ptolemy XIII, but falling out between the two of them led to a civil war. Shortly after the siege was lifted by reinforcements, Ptolemy XIII died in the Battle of the Nile. Caesar declared Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIV joint rulers and maintained a private affair with Cleopatra, which produced a son, Caesarion. Cleopatra traveled to Rome as a client queen in 46 and 44 BC, where she stayed at Caesar's villa. After Caesar's assassination, followed shortly afterwards by the sudden death of Ptolemy XIV, she named Caesarion co-ruler of Egypt with her. So pretty incredible if you think about Cleopatra, this very strong, beautiful woman who had tremendous impact on her country and really on the known world at that time. And as you see here, had to rule alongside both of her brothers and her son, largely because women weren't fully recognized back then to be a leader. But the true leader was her, and she had the respect of the people. She had the respect of Rome as well. So she had really an incredible life, and you can see the amount of impact that she was able to have on her people and on all of the known world at the time. Quite an amazing story, and we will be doing an episode fully dedicated to Cleopatra here in the near future. Our next woman from history is Sacagawea. She was an interpreter and explorer. Sacagawea lived from 1788 to 1812, and she was a Shoshone interpreter. her work with Lewis and Clark during their Corps of Discovery period that they were traveling across the country. And if you saw our episode on Lewis and Clark and their discovery journey that they did across to the Pacific Northwest, we talked quite a bit about Sacagawea in that episode. You should check it out. As a female Native American, Sacagawea's story could have easily been lost to history, but her role as a vital member of Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery, helping them forge relationships with the Native Americans, all while carrying her newborn baby on her back, ensured that this was not the case. Sacagawea traveled thousands of miles with the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806, from the Mandan Hidatsa villages in the Dakotas to the Pacific Northwest, acting as an interpreter and allaying the suspicions of tribes that they encountered, essentially becoming a peacemaker for them. In 1804, the Corps of Discovery reached a Mandan village where Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark built Fort Mandan for wintering over 1804 to 1805. They interviewed several trappers who might be able to interpret or guide the expedition up the Missouri River in the springtime, knowing that they would need to communicate with tribal nations who lived at the headwaters of the Missouri River. They agreed to hire Toussaint Charbonneau, who claimed to speak several native languages, and one of his wives who spoke Shoshone. Sacagawea was pregnant with her first child at the time with Charbonneau. In April, the expedition left Fort Mandan and headed up the Missouri River. They had to be poled against the current and sometimes pulled by crew along the riverbanks. On May 14th of 1805, Sacagawea rescued items that had fallen out of the capsized boat, including journals and records of Lewis and Clark. The Corps commanders who praised her quick action named the Sacagawea River in her honor on May 20th, 1805. By August 1805, the Corps had located a Shoshone tribe and was attempting to trade for horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. They used Sacagawea to interpret and discover the tribe's leader, Kamawat, and they found out that he was her brother. However, in Shoshone language, cousin and brother are the same word, so they weren't always fully sure whether it was truly her brother or it was actually her cousin. So you can see what an amazing woman Sacagawea was. Not only did she learn English, but she knew all these different Indian dialects, especially the Shoshone dialect, and actually guided them as a tour guide from her camp in North Dakota all the way out to the Pacific Northwest, and was able to help them interpret and smooth over many different tribes they ran into. They actually ran into 50 total tribes on the journey. So what an incredible story she has. Our next woman from history is Catherine de' Medici. She was Queen of France. You can see she was born in 1519 and lived till 1589. She was actually an Italian-born Queen of France. She was Queen of France and mother of 3 kings. She held a hugely influential position in the nation's politics throughout the 16th century. Civil war and religious tensions often led her to take drastic measures, yet she is also remembered for her tenacious nature and artistic patronage. Catherine was born in France to Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. In 1533, at the age of 14, Catherine married Henry, the second son of King Francis I and Queen Claude of France, who had become Dauphin of France upon the death of his elder brother Francis in 1536. Catherine's marriage was arranged by her uncle, the Pope, Giuliano de' Medici. Henry largely excluded Catherine from state affairs during his reign, instead showering favors on his chief mistress, Diane de Poitiers, who wielded a significant influence in the court. Henry's sudden accidental death in 1559 thrust Catherine into the political arena as mother of the frail 15-year-old Francis II. When Francis II died the next year, she became regent on behalf of her 10-year-old son, Charles IX, and thus gained sweeping powers of the entire kingdom. After Charles died in 1574, Catherine played a key role in the reign of her third son, Henry III. She dispensed all kinds of orders and guidance through all 3 of her sons' rules. The 3 sons reigned in an age of almost constant civil and religious war in France. The Guise faction tried to displace her sons in an attempt to establish a very own dynasty to rule over France. So you can see what an amazing woman this was. She lived 70 years, and she was able to be essentially the queen and queen mother of 3 kings of France, and was able to guide their entire kingdom into politics and try to get France through many different challenges at that time. She was a very, very powerful woman, and you can see had a humongous impact on France's politics during the medieval times. Our next woman from history is Wilma Rudolph. She's an Olympic champion. She was a sprinter. She was an American athlete who was the first Black woman to make a major impact on international track and field. She recovered from childhood polio, pneumonia, and scarlet fever to win 3 gold medals at the 1960 Olympic Games, the first American to ever do so. Her post-Olympic career included goodwill ambassadorial work for the American government in Africa, as well as campaigning work for the civil rights movement. With the worldwide television coverage of the 1960 Summer Games, Rudolph became an international superstar, along with other Olympic athletes such as Cassius Clay, Oscar Robinson, and Rayford Johnson. After retiring from competition, Rudolph continued her education at Tennessee State, earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education. That same year, she made a month-long trip to West Africa as a goodwill ambassador for the U.S. State Department. Rudolph served as U.S. representative to the 1963 Friendship Games in Dakar, Senegal, and visited Ghana, Guinea, Mali, and Upper Volta, where she attended sporting events, visited schools, and made guest appearances on TV and radio. So you can see Wilma Rudolph was one of those very impactful athletes from history. He was one of the first international superstars of an American Olympic team, largely because TV had come into much prominence in the 1960s. She became very famous, one of the most famous women in the United States, became one of those individuals who was on TV all the time, was getting sponsorships, and was directing a lot of her energy into really good causes and helping with the civil rights movement and helping with many different reforms in Africa as a goodwill ambassador. So she had a tremendous impact. She had her own stamp, as you can see there on the bottom, was one of the really admired Olympic athletes of all time, and somebody who had much reach outside of sports. Our next one from history is Lady Athelflaed. She was an Anglo-Saxon leader. Athelflaed was born in 870 and died in 918. She ruled as Lady of the Mercians in the English Midlands from 911 until her death in 918. So 7 years she was the leader and ruler. She was the eldest child of Alfred the Great, king of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, and his wife Aelswith. Athelflaed played a major role in fighting off renewed Viking attacks in the 890s, together with Athelflaed's brother, the future king Edward the Elder. Ethelred and Athelflaed fortified Worcester, gave generous donations to Mercian churches, and built a new minster in Gloucester. Aethelred's health probably declined early in the next decade, after which it is likely that Athelflaed was mainly responsible for the government of Mercia. Edward had succeeded as king to the Anglo-Saxons in 899, and in 909 he sent a West Saxon and Mercian force to raid northern Danelaw. They returned with the remains of the northern Numbrian Saint Oswald, which were translated to the new Gloucester minister. Ethelred died in 911, and Athelflaed took over the kingdom. In 917, as you see on the bottom right there, Lady Athelflaed, daughter of Alfred the Great, captured Derby, becoming the first woman to lead an Anglo-Saxon army to victory in battle. She built fortress towns along England from 911 to 918, defending against Viking attacks and shaping England's future unification. So what an incredibly impactful woman Lady Athelflaed was. Of course, her brothers were kings. Her father was a king. She came from that type of royalty, but at the same time, as you see, she was a just ruler. She had men follow her into battle, and the people loved her very much. She was very beloved by the people. And you can see she had a tremendous impact on that region of England and on the later unification of England after the Vikings were defeated. Our next woman from history is Jane Austen. She's an author and social commentator. She was a Georgian-era author, best known for her social commentary in novels such as Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma, all of which were fantastic books and became movies in their own right. While not widely known in her own time, Jane Austen's comic novels of love among the landed gentry gained popularity after 1869, and her reputation skyrocketed in the 20th century. Her novels, including Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, are considered literary classics, bridging the gap between romance and realism. Today, Austen is considered one of the greatest writers in English history, both by academics and general public. In 2002, as part of a BBC poll, the British public voted her the number 70 on the list of the 100 most famous Britons of all time. Austen's transformation from little-known to internationally renowned author began in the 1920s when scholars began to recognize her works as masterpieces, thus increasing her general popularity. You can see her date of birth, 1775, and then died in 1817. She actually changed the course of English literature with her social commentary in Pride and Prejudice, which was one of the most famous and popular books that she wrote. Interestingly enough, she actually wasn't revealed as the author of that book and her other two first novels until after her death at 41. So pretty incredible. She didn't actually see in her lifetime any of her accolades or other aspects that would have given her some popularity or notoriety. She essentially wrote these books as an unknown author. But now you can see she had a tremendous impact on our literary history and scholarly history. Our next woman from history is Susan B. Anthony. She was the women's suffrage leader. She was a suffragist, an abolitionist, an author, a speaker who was president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. You can see a great picture of her there on the bottom, a young picture, and then up above, close to the end of her life. Susan B. Anthony was an American writer, lecturer, and abolitionist who was a leading figure in the women's voting rights movement. Raised in a Quaker household, Anthony went on to work as a teacher. She later partnered with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and would eventually lead the National American Woman Suffrage Association. The work of Anthony and other suffragists eventually led to the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, granting all women the right to vote in 1920, which was 14 years after her death. So that's really unfortunate. She worked so hard her whole life to get women to vote, and she didn't get to see it in her lifetime. In the 1840s, Anthony's family became involved in the fight to end slavery, also known as the abolitionist movement. The Anthony's Rochester farm served as a meeting place for famed abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass. Around the time, Anthony became the head of the girls' department at Kanjorhari Academy, a post she held for 2 years. She was paid a yearly salary of only $110, which is about $4,300 today. Susan B. Anthony was the co-founder of the National Suffrage Association, and she fought hard for gender equality and women's right to vote. She sadly never got to see her dream become reality, as the 19th Amendment was passed 14 years after her death in 1906. So what an incredible leader she was, and she put her leading to action, and she actually was able to help both be part of the movement to abolish slavery, and then, of course, later in life, to help push for women's right to vote and make women have the same rights as men did at the time. Pretty amazing. Our next woman from history is Nellie Bly. She was an investigative journalist, born in 1864, died in 1922. Nellie Bly basically set the standard for investigative journalism. At the time when women writers were confined to society pages, Bly tackled more serious topics like mental health and poverty and corruption in politics. She's most famous for going undercover in the insane asylum at Blackwell's Island, which is now Roosevelt Island. Her expose on the horrific conditions brought about much needed changes to patient care at that facility. She also set the world record for circumventing the world. She completed the feat in just 72 days. So you can imagine, everyone always talked about round the world in 80 days. Well, she did it in 72. After the fanfare of her trip around the world, Bly quit reporting and took a lucrative job writing serial novels for publisher Norman Monroe's weekly New York Family Story Reporter. The first chapter of Eva the Adventuress, based on the real life of Eva Hamilton, appeared in print before Bly returned to New York between 1889 and 1895, and she wrote 11 novels in those 6 years. As few copies of the paper survived, these novels were thought lost until 2021, when author David Blixt announced the discovery of the 11 lost novels in Monroe's British paper. So what a great discovery. They found these 11 novels Nellie Bly had written and never got published, and now they're starting to publish them so people can read them. You can see some great pictures there of Nellie Bly in her incredible investigative journalist and writing career, and then that incredible headline she got after she did her circumvention of the entire globe in 72 days. Our next woman from history is Clara Barton, the American Red Cross founder. On April 19, 1861, the Baltimore riot resulted in the first bloodshed of the American Civil War. The victims, members of the 6th Massachusetts Militia, were transported after the violence to the unfinished Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where Clara Barton lived at the time. Wanting to serve her country, Barton went to the railroad station when the victims arrived and nursed 40 men. Barton provided crucial personal assistance to the men in uniform, many of whom were wounded, hungry, and without supplies. She personally took supplies to the building to help the soldiers. After the First Battle of Bull Run, Barton placed an ad in the Massachusetts paper for supplies, and the response was profound, with an influx of supplies coming in. She worked to distribute stores, clean field hospitals, apply dressings, and serve food to wounded soldiers in close proximity to several battles, including Cedar Mountain, Second Bull Run, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. So Barton actually helped both Union and Confederate soldiers throughout the war. So she was non-political. She just wanted to help people survive. After risking her life to bring supplies and support to wounded soldiers during the Civil War, earning the title of Angel of the Battlefield, Clara Barton went on to found the American Red Cross at the age of 59 years old, working with influential friends and contacts, including Frederick Douglass. Barton served as the president of the organization until the age of 83. Her legacy of comforting and caring for the wounded continues to be reflected through the volunteers and employees who work at the American Red Cross even today. So what an incredible legacy. She worked all the way through the Civil War to try to care for as many men as possible, became synonymous with nursing and becoming one of our great nurses of all time. And then, of course, her lasting legacy at the end of her life was to establish the American Red Cross, one of the best and most caring organizations in the world. Our next woman from history is Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister. She lived from 1925 to 2013. Margaret Thatcher was Britain's first female prime minister who came to power at an unsettled time in the country's history as it faced political disharmony and economic recession. Further trials included the 1982 Falklands War and the conflict in Northern Ireland, which helped to define her influential career. On becoming prime minister after winning the 1979 general election, Thatcher introduced a series of economic policies intended to reverse high inflation and Britain's struggles in the wake of the winter of discontent and an oncoming recession. Her political philosophy and economic policies emphasized greater individual liberty, the privatization of state-owned companies, and reducing the power and influence of trade unions. Her popularity in her first years in office waned amid the recession and rising unemployment. Victory in the 1982 Falklands War and the recovering economy brought a resurgence of support for her political fortunes, resulting in her landslide re-election in 1983. She survived an assassination attempt by the Provisional IRA in 1984 in the Brighton hotel bombing, and achieved a political victory against the National Union of Mine Workers in the 1984-85 miners' strike. In 1986, Thatcher oversaw the deregulation of the UK financial markets, leading to an economic boom in what came to be known as the Big Bang. So you can see Margaret Thatcher was a very influential and very impactful leader for England, being their first female prime minister. But if you really look back at her compared to most of their prime ministers, has had a tremendous impact on their history. And you see she achieved a lot of really great things. bringing the country back from the doldrums and making it a country that was on the move again. Our next woman from history is Eleanor Roosevelt. She was First Lady and woman's advocate. She lived from 1884 to 1862. When her husband, FDR, took office, Eleanor didn't just stand by. She dramatically changed the role of First Lady, advocating for human rights, women's rights, and children's causes. She went on to become the chair of the UN's Human Rights Commission in 1945. She was an American political figure, diplomat, activist. She was the longest-serving First Lady in the United States history during her husband Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 4 terms in office as president. Through her travels, public engagement, and advocacy, she largely defined the role of First Lady. Widowed in 1945, she served as United States delegate to the United Nations General Assembly from 1945 to 1952, and took a leading role in designing the text and gaining international support for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the UN adopted. In 1948, she was given a standing ovation by the Assembly upon their adoption of the Declaration. President Harry S. Truman later called her the First Lady of the World in tribute to her human rights achievements. So you can see she was an incredibly impactful First Lady, and really incredibly impactful after she left the White House and after her husband passed away. She was still very influential in international and American politics. It was also noted that she actually, many people thought, was president for the end of his 3rd term and most of his 4th term, because FDR was very much ailing and was not in very good health. And back then, many people in the country actually did not know how bad a health he was in. And so many people believe actually Eleanor Roosevelt was president, at least for his last term. But what an incredible woman she was, and all the achievements she had in her history. So our last woman of history is Joan of Arc, the leader of the French resistance. If you didn't get a chance to look at our Joan of Arc episode that we did some months ago, we put a lot of really great research and great background into that particular episode. I'll drop that in the description down below if you'd like to take a look at that episode. So Saint Joan of Arc, born in 1412 in Domremy-Bar, France, died May 30th of 1431 in Rouen. She was canonized May 16th of 1920, or feast day. She was a French national heroine, a peasant girl who, believing that she was acting under divine guidance, led the French army in a momentous victory at Orleans that repulsed an English attempt to conquer France during the 100 Years' War. Captured a year afterwards, Joan was burned to death by the English and burned at the stake with her French collaborators as a heretic. She became the greatest of national heroines for her compatriots, and her achievement was a decisive factor in the later awakening of French national consciousness. Joan left Orleans on May 9th and met Charles at Tours. She urged him to make haste to Reims to be crowned, though he hesitated because some of the more prudent counselors were advising him to undertake the conquest of Normandy. Joan's importunity ultimately carried the day. It was decided, however, first to clear the English out of the other towns along the Loire River. Joan met her friend Duc d'Alençon, who had been made lieutenant general of the French army. What an incredible legacy Joan of Arc had, and to think that she did all of this work that we're talking about between the age of 16 and 19. She was actually burned at the stake at 19 years old. And so for her to become one of the great heroines of French history and one of the most famous heroines in world history is pretty incredible in just 3 short years. So that tells you the kind of impact she had on the 100 Years' War. So hopefully you learned enjoying about those 20 amazing women from history, some of whom you knew and some of whom you might not have known anything about, and you learned something new. And hopefully even the ones that you had heard of, you learned a little bit new about each one of them. As you can see, there's a lot of important women from history, many of them unknown, that we really should be highlighting. And so, as I said before, this is going to be our part 1 in the series, and we'll be looking at many other incredible women from history in our part 2 and part 3 of the series. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight and learning something about these amazing and important women. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We always have amazing content coming your way. And I want to thank you very much for your patronage and for all of your likes and subscribes and all of your great comments that you've been leaving on the channel. Hope you all have a great evening. Thanks so much.